The year was 1865, and the frontier stretched like an endless scar across the earth, a place where men carved their fortune with iron and fire, and where women carried both the weight of survival and the cruelty of men's ambition. Dust hung heavy in the air that day, drifting through the crooked timbers of Red Rock, a settlement no larger than a cluster of saloons, a trading post, and a church that leaned as though it too had given up the fight. The sun was dropping low, bleeding gold across the western horizon, and the streets were full of watchful eyes as the outlaws rode in. She was among them, slumped in the saddle, wrists bound, her dress torn and stained by travel and struggle. The rope around her arms had rubbed the skin raw, and her face, pale beneath the grime, carried the weight of someone who had seen her whole world burn. Once she had been the daughter of a rancher, her father's land stretching far across the open plain, but now that land was ash and her family buried beneath it. They had come at night, the same men who paraded her through town now, setting torches to the barn, firing into the house, laughing as the flames climbed higher. She remembered her mother's scream, her brother's desperate charge with a rifle too small against the odds. When the smoke cleared, she alone remained, alive but not unbroken. The gang that led her into Red Rock wanted everyone to see. This wasn't just about one woman. They wanted to send a message that no one defied them, that land, pride, and family were things they could take at will. The leader, a man named Vance Holloway, dismounted and dragged her from the horse, tossing her into the dirt as though she were no more than baggage. His boots crunched on the street as he turned to the gathering crowd, his voice cutting like a whip. This is what happens when a family forgets their place. She's the last of them, and I reckon she'll serve as an example. No one moved. Men leaned against door frames, hands hovering near revolvers, but never daring to draw. Women stood with aprons twisted between their fingers, eyes downcast. The sheriff's office was empty. The law in Red Rock had long ago chosen survival over confrontation. The air was thick with smoke from the saloon and the sharper sting of fear. She raised her head, strands of hair falling across her bruised cheek. Her eyes found no kindness in the crowd, no hand outstretched, only silence and the weight of 100 glances that turned quickly away. Her lips trembled, not from tears, they had already been spent in the long miles behind her, but from a fury she could not voice. That was when he stepped forward. From the shadows at the edge of the street, a tall figure emerged. Hat pulled low, dust from the trail still clinging to his coat. His presence drew whispers, hushed words that carried weight. He was known, though not well. Some said he had drifted in months ago, a man with no home and no name he cared to share. Others swore they'd seen him before, in towns scarred by gunfights and graves dug too shallow. He walked with a quiet purpose, his boots steady against the wood planks, and when his hand hovered near the iron at his hip, it was not a threat but a promise. Let her go. The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward. Holloway turned, his sneer twisting into something half amusement, half menace. "And who are you to speak, stranger? You reckon you'll play the hero?" He spat in the dust, hand resting lazily on his revolver. "This ain't your concern." The man's eyes gray, cold, yet carrying a flicker of something unyielding, did not waver. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking, tension thickening with every heartbeat. "It became my concern the moment you tied her hands." Laughter erupted from Holloway's men, a harsh sound, but beneath it lay unease. Something in the stranger's stance, in the way he measured each word, suggested he was not bluffing. The woman, still in the dirt, looked up at him, confusion etched across her face. Why would a man risk himself for her? For someone broken, someone cast aside by the very people who now watched in silence? Holloway's grin faltered. "You must got a death wish." "No," the man replied, his voice low, steady. "Just a promise I aim to keep." The street held its breath. Then came the sound of a hammer cocking. A shot cracked the air, followed by chaos. Men scattered, women screamed, and the town erupted into violence. The stranger's gun cleared leather before Holloway could blink, the first outlaw falling with a cry that choked off in blood. Bullets tore through the air, splinters flying from the saloon's porch as men dove for cover. The woman scrambled to her knees, the rope at her wrists cutting deeper as she struggled to crawl away. Through the haze of dust and smoke, the stranger moved like a shadow, his shots quick, decisive. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him back, but he kept firing, each shot a thunderclap that sent another man down. Holloway cursed, pulling her upright as a shield, pressing the cold barrel of his pistol to her temple. "Drop it or she dies." The stranger froze, gun steady but eyes locked on hers. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single moment. The weight of her terror, the cold press of iron against her skin, the question of whether any man could save her now. She shook her head, as if begging him not to surrender, even as fear threatened to crush her chest. Then he moved. A flash of steel, a single shot, and Holloway staggered back, hand clutching his arm where the bullet had torn flesh. The woman fell free, stumbling into the stranger's arms as the last of the gang mounted up, dragging their wounded leader with them. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the acrid scent of gunpowder. The crowd began to emerge, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. Some stared with awe, others with suspicion, but none dared step closer. He looked down at the woman in his arms, her breath ragged, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're safe," he said, though his voice carried no comfort, only resolve. She pulled away, her voice hoarse, bitter. "Safe? You don't know what they've taken. I've got nothing left." He studied her for a long moment, then holstered his revolver. "You're alive. That's more than nothing. It's a start." The words struck her harder than any blow, not because they were gentle, but because they carried truth she could not deny. She wanted to curse him, to demand he leave her to whatever fate remained, yet something in his eyes held her. Not pity, not charity, but recognition, as though he too carried scars carved deep by fire and loss. The sun had slipped low, shadows stretching long across the dirt street. The townsfolk returned to their business, eager to forget, to bury the memory beneath whiskey and silence. But she and the stranger knew forgetting was impossible. Their fates had been bound together in that moment of defiance, in blood and fire. He offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it, the rope still dangling from her wrists. Without another word, he led her toward the waiting horses, the sound of hooves soon carrying them beyond Red Rock, into the wilderness where vengeance and survival awaited. Behind them, the town breathed again, but the echo of gunfire lingered. The frontier was not done with them, and neither were the men who had tried to destroy her. And though she did not yet understand why, she knew the stranger would stand between her and the world as both shield and weapon until the end. Night draped itself over the plains like a heavy shroud, the stars sharp as glass in the clear, cold sky. The horses carried them hard and fast away from Red Rock, hooves pounding into the earth with a rhythm that echoed her racing pulse. The stranger rode ahead, his broad shoulders outlined against the dim horizon, while she clung to the saddle, wrists raw where the rope still burned her skin. Every sound in the dark, the cry of a night bird, the snap of a branch, set her heart hammering. She knew Holloway and his men would not retreat for long. Men like that never let a slight go unpunished. By dawn, they had reached a rise overlooking a wide, empty valley. Dust trailed faintly in the far distance, proof the gang still pursued. The stranger dismounted, tying his horse to a stunted mesquite tree, and finally cut the ropes from her wrists with the edge of his knife. The cords fell away, leaving angry red welts. She flexed her hands, staring at him with suspicion. "You don't even know my name," she said. He paused, wiping the blade against his boot before sliding it back into its sheath. "Name don't matter. Not yet." "Then why help me?" He looked out across the valley, eyes fixed on the faint line of riders drawing nearer. "Because if I don't, there won't be nothing left of you to save." The words settled heavy between them. She opened her mouth to argue, to push back against the weight of gratitude she didn't want to carry, but the sound of distant gunfire cut her short. Holloway's men were shooting into the air, a signal. They weren't far behind. They pressed on. The land grew harsher with every mile, jagged rocks tearing at the horses' hooves, the sun burning down with merciless heat. She stumbled often, her body weakened by days of captivity, but he never let her falter. He handed her canteen, offered her dried meat, his silence as constant as his shadow. Though he spoke little, she began to catch glimpses of something unspoken in him, a grief that ran deeper than scars. On the third day, they reached the river. Its waters were swollen from spring rains, rushing fast, frothing white against the jagged stones. He studied the current, jaw clenched. "We cross here," he said. She stared at the torrent, her voice breaking. "We'll be swept away." Better chance than waiting for Holloway to catch up. He led his horse into the shallows first, the animal fighting against the pull of the river. She followed, the water biting cold as it surged around her waist, dragging her downstream. She slipped, the current yanking her feet from beneath her. For a breathless moment, she was under, lungs filling with icy water. She broke the surface with a cry, arms thrashing, only to feel his grip seize her wrist, hauling her back upright. "Hold on," he barked, teeth clenched as the river tried to tear them both apart. Step by grueling step, he pulled her across until at last they staggered onto the far bank, drenched and shivering. She collapsed on the rocks, coughing, while he dropped to one knee, chest heaving. It was then she saw it, blood soaking through his sleeve where the earlier bullet had grazed him, the wound reopened by the struggle. She tore a strip from her dress without a word, binding it tight. He watched her with something close to surprise. "You didn't have to." She met his gaze, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Neither did you." That night, they made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods. The firelight painted his face in flickering gold, revealing the lines carved deep by years of hardship. She studied him in the silence, finally asking, "Who are you really?" He stirred the fire with a stick, eyes distant. "Name's Caleb. I had a wife once. A boy, too. Holloway's men came through our land same as yours. Took everything. Left me with nothing but a grave to dig." The words cut deeper than any knife. She felt the truth of them in his voice, the hollow ache that matched her own. They sat in silence, bound by grief neither had chosen, but both understood. Their rest was brief. At dawn, they stumbled into a small homestead, a family of settlers who welcomed them with guarded kindness. Bread, water, a place to rest, the first comfort she had felt in weeks. But comfort was a fragile thing on the frontier. By dusk, the riders came. Holloway's men had been warned, the settlers' fear stronger than their mercy. Gunfire shattered the quiet, bullets thudding into the wooden walls. Caleb shoved her down behind a wagon, his pistol barking in answer. The settlers scattered, leaving them alone to face the onslaught. She felt panic rising, the old helplessness threatening to drown her, until she saw Caleb stumble, his leg grazed by a shot. Without thinking, she seized his dropped rifle, awkward in her hands but steady enough to fire back. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but one of Holloway's men fell and the others pulled back, regrouping. When silence returned, broken only by the ragged cry of a child inside the house, she lowered the rifle, breathless. Caleb leaned against the wagon, eyes fixed on her. "You did good," he said, his voice rough but sincere. Her hands trembled, but she met his gaze without flinching. For the first time since the fire that had stolen her family, she felt a spark of strength. That night, they did not light a fire. They sat beneath the stars, their breaths clouding in the cool air. She broke the silence, her voice raw. "Why me? Why risk all this?" Caleb's eyes lingered on the dark horizon where the outlaws camped unseen, but certain. His words were soft, heavy with memory. "Because no one risked it for mine, and I can't carry that weight again." She looked at him, the man who had stepped from the shadows in Red Rock, who had pulled her from river and fire, who carried scars like her own. For the first time, she felt not like a burden, but like a partner in a fight neither of them could walk away from. The night stretched long, filled with silence, but beneath it lay a new bond forged in blood and fire. Though she still feared what lay ahead, she no longer saw herself as the broken woman dragged through the dirt of Red Rock. She was something more now, and with Caleb beside her, the flames of her will burn anew. When dawn came, the horizon was red with promise and peril alike. They mounted their weary horses, and without looking back, rode toward the fate that waited, knowing the road ahead was fire, and neither could face it alone. Dawn crept slow and merciless across the land, painting the horizon in streaks of crimson that bled into the pale sky. The air was sharp with the bite of early morning, and the land lay quiet except for the restless shifting of the horses tied inside the crumbling ruins of the old fort. Its adobe walls leaned, half-eaten by time, but the high ground gave them one advantage: visibility. From here, they could see the valley stretch wide and bare, every movement along the trail etched against the dust. Caleb stood on the wall, rifle resting across his arm, eyes fixed on the faint plume of dust rising miles away. Holloway was coming. They both knew it. He hadn't spoken since the night before, when he'd walked the perimeter, testing each weak point, each crumbling barricade. Now he stood still, jaw tight, the weariness in his frame hidden by resolve. She watched him from the ground, her own hands busy stacking cartridges, setting them where he could reach. Her body trembled, not with fear alone, but with the weight of what they faced. The silence between them was thick, but not empty. She had come to know his silence, to hear in it the language of scars and promises, and she understood more than words could carry. Finally, she broke it. "We could run again." Caleb shook his head without turning. "Ain't nowhere left to run. Not for us. They'll hunt till there's nothing left." He looked down at her then, his gray eyes hard but not unkind. "This ends here." She swallowed, throat dry, and nodded. She had thought herself broken, nothing but the ashes of what once was. But in his gaze, she saw something different. A mirror of her pain, yes, but also a demand that she stand with him, not behind him. And she knew she would. The dust cloud grew, the shapes of riders emerging, sunlight glinting off the iron in their hands. Holloway rode at the front, his arm bound where Caleb's bullet had struck him, hatred carved deep into his face. The gang fanned out, a tide of menace rolling across the plain. Their laughter carried faint on the wind. Caleb chambered around with a clean, sharp click. "Stay low. Fire only when you must." Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady as she lifted the rifle he'd taught her to hold. They crouched behind the ruined wall as the riders thundered closer, the ground trembling beneath their charge. The first shot cracked, sharp and final. One rider fell, tumbling from the saddle into dust. Chaos erupted, gunfire roaring, bullets slamming into the walls, shards of adobe flying. She ducked, ears ringing, then lifted the rifle and fired. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but another man went down. Caleb moved with a deadly calm, each shot precise, deliberate. He was everywhere at once, shouting for her to shift, pulling her back, when the wall crumbled under fire, standing like iron against the storm. Blood darkened his sleeve again, but he fought on unyielding. The gang pressed harder, circling, trying to force them into the open. Smoke thickened, the air hot with powder. She felt terror clawing at her, the old helplessness whispering, but she fought it down, forcing her hands to steady. When one rider broke through the barricade, she fired point blank, the blast throwing him backward. Her ears rang, her chest heaved, but she didn't stop. Then Holloway himself stormed forward, his pistol blazing. He dismounted with a snarl, striding toward them through the smoke. His voice rang out, harsh and mocking. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a dead man walking, and she's mine to finish." Caleb stepped out from cover, revolver raised. The two men faced each other, dust swirling around them, the world narrowing to this one final reckoning. Holloway fired first, the bullet grazing Caleb's side. He staggered but stayed upright, firing back. Holloway cursed, stumbling as the shot clipped his shoulder. They closed the distance, weapons empty, the fight crashing into fists and fury. She watched, breath locked in her throat as Caleb and Holloway grappled, each blow landing with brutal force. Caleb fought with grim determination, every strike fueled by loss and memory, but Holloway's rage was monstrous, his laughter wild as he drove Caleb back. With a savage swing, Holloway slammed him into the crumbling wall, knocking the wind from his chest. The outlaw drew his knife, raising it high. "This ends with you in the dirt." Before the blade could fall, she moved. Without thought, without hesitation, she seized the rifle at her feet, aimed and fired. The shot tore through Holloway's chest, his grin collapsing into shock. He staggered, knife clattering to the ground, and then he fell, dust rising around him in a final shroud. Silence crashed over the fort. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, broke, scattering across the plain in a desperate flight. Hooves thundered away, leaving only the wind and the echo of gunfire. She dropped the rifle, breath ragged, hands shaking as she stumbled toward Caleb. He was on his knees, blood seeping from his wounds, but his eyes lifted to her with something fierce, something almost proud. "You did it," he rasped. Her chest tightened. "No, we did it." She knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his side, her voice breaking. "You've been my shield since the day you stepped forward in Red Rock. But today I stood for you too." He gave a faint smile, the first she had seen from him, a ghost of warmth beneath the lines of pain. "Reckon we make a good pair, then?" The sun climbed higher, spilling light over the battlefield, gilding the ruins with fire. The fort stood silent, but for the labored breaths of the living and the stillness of the dead. She knew the fight was not over. Men like Holloway had allies, and the frontier never let its debts rest. But for now, they had carved a victory out of blood and resolve. She sat with him as the morning stretched on, holding his hand, refusing to let the silence steal the moment. For the first time since her world had burned, she felt not just survival, but something stronger. Hope, fragile but real. The narrator's voice, if such a thing could be heard in the hush of dawn, might have said this. The frontier was never merciful. It tested every soul who dared to stand upon it, stripping away the weak, leaving only those who could endure. But sometimes, in its cruelty, it forged bonds that no fire could consume. She rose at last, helping Caleb to his feet. Together, they stepped beyond the walls of the ruined fort, into a land still wild, still dangerous but no longer faced alone. And as they walked into the blaze of morning, the question lingered, not of whether the world would try to destroy her again, it surely would, but whether those who tried would ever stand against a shield forged of pain, love, and unyielding will.